Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
My pleasure to be on.
So, Dr. Shabir, is God a white man?
In the Islamic tradition, we do not depict God in an anthropomorphic way. We do not think of him as resembling human beings. In fact, the Quran says, "Laysa kamithlihi shay." There is nothing like unto him. And in one of the shortest surahs of the Quran, which most Muslims have memorized and recite and have been reciting since childhood, it says, "Walam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad," and there is no one equal to him. Well, we have the idea that God is of such a nature that he is invisible to the human eye, and the Quran says, "La tudrikuhu al-absar, wa huwa yudriku al-absar, wa huwa al-latiful khabir." Vision does not grasp him, but he grasps all vision, and he is subtle and aware. So we think of God in the Islamic tradition as otherworldly and of such a nature that we cannot imagine. In fact, it's common in Islamic theology to think that whatever you can imagine in your mind, that's not God. Mm-hmm. So we wouldn't think of him in human terms. So the question of race does not come up. He's not a man to begin with.
So he's neither white nor a man then.
Exactly, yeah.
So, Dr. Shabir, would you say that the images of God, if you Google God and the image that comes up is this white haired figure, right, with a beard, often that figure of the pointing finger. Is that foreign to Islam?
Yes, and in fact, it is also foreign to the Bible as a whole, because in the book of Deuteronomy and in Exodus, Moses is given the Ten Commandments, and right at the top there, God is saying, do not make any graven images, because God does not look like anything that walks on the earth or flies in the sky or swims in the ocean. And it so happens that, in cultures over time, people have tended to find depictions of God and drew icons and made three-dimensional representations of God. But the Quran came strongly against idol worship and making icons and representations and images for God. But it so happens that this is how things have unfolded, that people have started to think of God in human terms, and then they picture the human in their own image. Mm-hmm. So, a white person tending to think that God must be white, and perhaps
maybe even a person of color tending to think of God as white, right?
Yes, and maybe even as a person of color as well. Mm-hmm. So it can work either way.
So, Dr. Shabir, do you think there's a problem with that? Is there anything wrong with an individual looking, towards God and seeing this sort of image in their imagination, right? Comparing God to something.
Mm-hmm. Well, from a theological point of view, from the Islamic point of view, this is something wrong. We should not be depicting God and making God in our own image. But it also has practical dimensions in that if someone thinks of God as being of a particular color, then they will think that people on earth of a particular color are more in the image of God than others. Mm-hmm. And in fact, if one depicts God in one's own mind as being male, then one might tend to think that the males are more in the image of God than females. Mm-hmm. And in fact, some researchers recently had conducted some studies using American subjects and some Christians and eventually some non-Christians as well, even atheists, to think about what is the impact of a person's own conception of God on how they perceive human leaders. And it was found that those who think that God is a white man, they more likely thought that a white man would be more suitable for leadership. Mm-hmm. And this goes down all the way down to children. If children were asked to draw images depicting how they think God to be, and when those images were then shown to adults to try to identify, what these images represent, whether a white person or so on, then it was found that the children also are depicting God as a white person, and once they do that, then they more likely, when the children are then shown images of like here's the lineup of suspects. Okay, not suspects, but here are people in my organization. Here is a dozen people. 3 of them are bosses. Which ones do you think are bosses? And they tend to pick the white persons as the bosses. So they tend to think of God as being white and then think of the bosses as being white as well.
Thank you for sharing that research with us. Very interesting findings.
You're welcome.